Hi kids! We are back on another edition of Reading with Joan. I hope you have fun as you join us as we read the various books we have on the show.
Reading with Joan.
If you have not submitted your competition for the Kids Fest, kindly submit at readingwithjoan@gmail.com. I'll repeat, readingwithjoan@gmail.com. We look forward to your art, your short stories, your poem, your songs, whatever creative thing you can do. We look forward to having you, and hopefully before the deadline on the 27th of July. We'll see you soon for the next story.
It is right to have fun with each other and be friends with one another. So
Hi everyone, it's Big J. Today we're going to be reading Black and British, and we're still doing the late Georgians. This is the 4th episode we're doing. Okay, here we go. Today we're learning about the rights of men. The last years of the 18th century were years of revolution, starting in France. In 1789, the revolutionaries demanded freedom, equality, and the rights of man. These same ideas reached France's slave colonies in West Indies. In 1791, the 500,000 people who were enslaved on the island of St. Dominic, modern Haiti, rose up to seize their freedom. The revolution lasted until 1804. The most largest slave rebellion in history. The cane beans of St. Dominic produced around 30% of all the world's sugar. In the first weeks of the uprising, over 1,000 of the plantations upon which the black people had been forced to work were destroyed, led by their general, Butcher. Former slaves were victorious, and the French slave colony of St. Dominique became the Free Black Republic of Haiti. Slave owners across the West Indies and America were shocked as slave rebellion had been successful. There were also slave rebellions in Britain's colonies in the West Indies. They enslaved people in Jamaica, St. Vincent, Demerara, which is actually Guyana nowadays, Grenada, and St. Lucia all rebelled. The enslaved were determined to resist oppression and weaken the slave system whenever they got the chance. The slave owners were determined to fight to defend slavery. The abolitionists remained focused on ending the slave trade. William Wilberforce led the struggle to pass the law that would end the trade. He made his first attempt to get Parliament to pass a law to end trade in 1791. It was easily defeated by 163 votes to 88, partly because a number of MPs were slave owners and others were supporters of the slave traders. That's almost 2 times. That's almost double. Wilberforce tried again the following year, but that attempt was also rejected by MPs. Wilberforce kept trying. That's perseverance. He introduced bills for the abolition of the slave every year between 1794 and 1799, 5 years. He lost the vote every time. In 1805, yet another bill was defeated in Parliament, and by then, the political mood had begun to change. Many of the pro-slavery members of Parliament had retired, and a new generation had taken their place on the benches of the House of Commons. In 1807, Wilberforce, with the encouragement of the Prime Minister, Lord Granville, introduced another abolition bill. This time, it passed and became law in 1808. The British slave trade that had begun in the 1660s under King Charles II was over. The slave trade is done. Gradualis. The abolition of slave trade was an important victory, but slavery itself remained legal. But hundreds of thousands of black people remained enslaved. The islands of the West Indies. It's terrible. Yet the abolitionists did not start to campaign to have them made free. William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, and almost all of the abolitionists believed in what they called gradualism. What do you think that means, kids? Here's the definition. It meant that slavery had to be ended gradually, over many years. They suggested that the enslaved people had to be prepared for freedom by being educated and by becoming Christians. Many of the abolitionists now spent their time supporting the work of missionaries who were sent to the West Indies to educate the enslaved and convert them to Christianity. The abolitionists had always believed that if the slave trade was ended, the slave owners would treat the enslaved people better. That theory was put to test. Both the abolitionists and the government set about gathering statistics about West Indian slavery. An act passed in 1819 requires all slaves to be registered. This made it possible to create a census, a list of all the enslaved people. This could be used to see if they were being better treated, as it showed how many people died and how many babies were born, and if those babies survived their first years. Kids, do you know another story from history that also had a census? Put it down in the comments if you think you know what it is. What the slave census and the investigations by the abolitionists revealed was that after the end of the slave trade, the slave owners did not reform slavery. They did not come to see the enslaved people as valuable assets that had to be looked after better. Instead, enslaved women and children were compelled to work harder. That means they were forced to, all doing jobs that demanded greater physical exertion. Women were forced to work in the fields, and both women and men that once worked as servants in the homes of the slave owners, which is a lot easier than farming, were marched to the fields and made to plant, tend, and cut sugarcane, and we read earlier that it was hard work. Enslaved people were also rented out by one slave owner to another, which meant their families were broken up, and they had less time to grow food on their own little patches of land. The end of the slave trade had not made life better for the enslaved people of the British colonies of the West Indies. In 1823, a new generation of abolitionists began a struggle to end slavery itself. Many of the new abolitionists wanted slavery to be ended immediately, not gradually, and many of the leaders were women. One of the most important was Elizabeth Haywood, a Quaker schoolteacher from Leicester, who in 1824 wrote a pamphlet called Immediate, not gradual abolition. Other female abolitionists began a new sugar boycott and organized new waves of abolitionist meetings and petitions. Let's read about the rebellion in Jamaica. At Christmas in 1831, events in the West Indies gave the issue of slavery a new and deadly urgency. A rebellion broke out in the west of Jamaica. It was led by Sam Sharp, an enslaved man who could read and write. Gotcha. Kids, do you remember Granville Sharp from earlier chapters? I wonder they're related. He was also a member of a Baptist church. What Sharp planned was a strike. His modest demand was that the slave owners should pay the enslaved for their labor. They promised one another that they would refuse to work after Christmas 1831, unless the slave owners promised to pay them wages. It was what we today would call nonviolent action or civil disobedience. Kids, do you know another civil rights movement, which we would call civil disobedience? It's the suffragettes. They were campaigning for women to vote, and they did things like chaining themselves to railings just so that people would ask why they're doing it, and they would say women would get the vote. Okay, let's read on. The slave owners had been expecting some form of resistance from the enslaved, and they attacked the striking slaves who then rose up. At least 20,000 slaves began to fight for their freedom. Some reports suggested that the final figure was 50,000 or even 60,000. The sugarcane fields were set ablaze, and the great houses of the slave owners burnt down. The rebellion lasted 2 weeks, and it took the local garrison of the British Army 3 months to completely end the fighting. Wow. More than 300 rebels were killed, and at least 340 more, including Sam Sharp, were executed. A further 140 were shipped off as convicts to New South Wales and Australia. Over £1 million worth of damage had been done. And the slave owners blamed the Baptist missionaries who had spread Christianity among the enslaved. After the rebellion, it was clear that if the enslaved are not emancipated, there would be a second and even greater rebellion in Jamaica. By the summer of 1833, the slave owners knew that slavery was coming to an end. For years, they demanded that if the enslaved were to be freed, the slave owners had to be paid compensation for the loss of human property. The government finally agreed to that demand and to give £20 million but of 46,000 slave owners. What did the former slaves get? Nothing. While the government began the huge task of distributing the compensation money, the enslaved people remained where they were, working on the plantation. Under the law passed to end slavery, they were not to be freed straight away. Instead, a new system called apprenticeship was invented. This meant that the former slaves had to continue working for the same masters another 6 years and without being paid. Eventually, the government agreed to end apprenticeship system early. And on the 1st of August 1838, 800,000 enslaved people were finally freed from parts of the West Indies today. Today, 1st of August is celebrated as Emancipation. Kids, that's a lot like the 4th of July that they celebrate in America, also about freedom, independence. Okay, kids, I hope you enjoyed Black and British today. And we finally finished the late Georgians, so next episode we're going on to a new topic. Can you guess what it is? If not, you'll find out if you tune in next week. See you later. Bye!
Reading with Joan.
Hi kids! I hope you had a lovely time last week. We're going to continue our story from Tales from the Caribbean, and the title of the story we've been reading is, can anybody tell me? Shout it out! The Choosy Choosy! Okay, come on, let's continue. Did you remember where we stopped? We stopped on her wedding day, and Sam came visiting. Oh, let's see what's gonna happen. Okay, let's continue. Sam carried the box of fish to the palace kitchen. There was so much fish he had to cross the courtyard several times. Each time he crossed the courtyard, Sam looked up the balcony to see if Princess Verona was there. She was nowhere to be seen. After the last box was delivered, Sam left, convinced now that any dream of marrying Princess Verona was well and truly dashed. As he walked away, Verona peeked from behind the pillar of the balcony and watched him go. But it was too late. Camo, her husband-to-be, will be arriving soon to marry. Sam could see a glittering horse chariot coming towards the palace. Inside was a man Sam thought must be Verona's fiance, Camo. Sam decided to wait around to have a good look at the man Verona intended to marry. The man got out of a carriage and Sam bid him good day, wishing him well on his wedding day. None the wiser, Camo thanked him and entered the palace. Sam took a disliking to him straight away. Perhaps this was natural, since the man is about to marry the only girl he has ever truly loved. But looking into Camo's piercing green eyes, he sent a shivering down Sam's spine. He decided he would hang around a little bit longer. He wanted to make sure Verona really was going to be married to the perfect man. Hiding behind the palace wall, Sam secretly watched all the guests arriving for the wedding. When the final guests arrived, the wedding was about to begin. Sam slipped into the palace and mingled with the guests unnoticed. All the time his eyes was fixed on Verona. It almost broke his heart to see the beautiful Verona exchanging wedding vows with the strange man. Sam had hoped and dreamed that he would be the one exchanging wedding vows with Verona on their special day, and it hurt him deeply. When the ring was placed in Verona's finger, it hurt him so much that he thought he couldn't breathe again. I feel like crying, kids. Can you give me a tissue? My heart is broken. When the service was over and the merriment began, Sam thought he would take a closer look at Verona's new husband. He watched as others congratulated him with a handshake, and he waited in line for his turn. And when he got close, he was disturbed by the green hue on the man's skin. What is it? It reminded Sam of the color of the deepest ocean. Why has nobody else noticed how odd the color of the skin was? And when Sam took his hand, he was not ready for the raw, feathery texture of it. It scared him. Unable to keep his concern to himself any longer, Sam approached the king quietly. Your Majesty, please, may I have a word? Sam, I wasn't expecting to see you here. Is everything all right? No, you must get your daughter away from that man. He's not right for her, Sam said. Of course, the king thought that Sam's jealousy was getting the better of him. He tried to calm Sam down. Now, don't make a fool of yourself, young man. My daughter is happily married now. So off you go. Be on your way. He had a servant throw Sam out of the palace. Sam didn't know what to do next. Suddenly, he spotted the glittering carriage waiting outside, ready to take Verona and her new husband to their new home. He decided to attach himself to the back of the carriage and hide there so he could go with them when they left. The time came for Verona and her new husband to leave. The king and all the guests waved them off and wished them well. And the glittering carriage set off. And from the inside, Princess Verona blew final kisses to her husband and he wiped a tear off his face. As much as he wanted to get rid of her because of her fuzziness, she knew she would miss her as he loved her very much. As they left, Verona's eyes seemed to search the crowd for someone else, but she couldn't see Sam anywhere. It was long and uncomfortable ride to Camo's house. Sam held onto the back of a glittering carriage for his dear life, and inside, Verona grew tired and slept for part of a way. When she woke up, she expected to be in her new husband's magnificent, I'll say, castle. But instead, the carriage pulled up in a miserable looking shack surrounded by big bushes and tangled vines. She thought they must have taken a wrong turn and become lost. Home, sweet home, said Camo, her husband. Home? Said Verona. What do you mean? Where's your castle? I don't have one, laughed Camo. I lied. At once, he grabbed her with his rough, scaly green hands and began to drag her out of the carriage. I am Camo, dear snake, and I heard you are looking for the perfect husband. So I disguised myself and I fooled you into believing I was him. Ouch! You are hurting me! Let me go! Let me go! Screamed Verona, but the horrible snake would not let her go. You heard what she said Sam, jumping down from the back of her carriage. Let her go! Camodia was taken entirely by surprise. Verona too was shocked but was pleased to see him. Sam immediately tried to break Verona free from the grip of Camodia's hand, but the cunning snake held on tightly and would not let go. Camodia opened up his big snake mouth and was about to gobble up Princess Verona when Sam got out his sharp farmer's knife and in one sweet moment sliced off Camodia's head, letting Verona free. Oh, Sam! I'm so sorry! Cried Verona. I was too choosy. If only I had not been so foolish and had not followed my heart, none of this would have happened. So Sam was happy to have Verona back and away from the wicked grip of Camodia that he forgave her and asked her to marry him. And Princess Verona did not or ha. She said yes right away. Can you say it with me? Yes! Yeah, come on, say yes! Now, what did you learn? Very important lessons from this book. Can somebody tell me? The first lesson is the title. Don't be choosy. Choosy landed Verona into trouble. Kids, learn to be satisfied with what you have, whether small or big. Kids, learn to be grateful. Learn to have a heart of gratitude. And thirdly, kids, don't let your parents get tired of you because you are too fuzzy. Because fuzzy people make other people frustrated and tired, and they are difficult to live with. I hope you will not be one of that. And I hope you have a wonderful time as we look forward to another time reading with you on Reading with Joan. Remember, every lesson learned should be a lesson that should be acted upon. And until next time, when I see you once again on Reading with Joan, can we say bye-bye, so long, see you, bye. Hi, it is Reading with Joan. Do you remember our Kid Fest competition? It's our art and science competition on InfoHubMe. If you have not submitted, kindly do so. Remember, the deadline is fast approaching, April 27th. If you've written a song, if you've drawn your art, if you've written a story, kindly drop it today. Reading with Joan at gmail.com. I'll repeat, readingwithjones@gmail.com. I look forward to your wonderful entrance and I look forward to being the judge and pick the best. So see you. Bye.